So last week we did the Moon Druid, focusing on the Wild Shape ability, and this week's Druid, Wild Shape is out the window. This is all about spell casting and healing, and man, I really enjoyed this build. So let's get into it. I just want to say thank you for the 5,000 subscribers. It means a lot to me that y'all click that red button. And if you enjoy this video, please click that red button. So this build is really about two things: utility, damage dealing, and healing. The Druid is such a flexible class as it has access to a number of really powerful spells, especially in the early access, that can be used constantly in combat, as spells like Moonbeam can be moved around the battlefield, dealing damage every time it makes contact with an enemy while only consuming a single level 2 spell slot just to keep it active. So very easily you can deal consistent damage every turn and cause other disruptions with some of the other abilities that the Druids have, like Entangle or Spike Growth. You also have the ability to heal allies pretty much every turn as well via a bonus action or an action if you do need to hit with one of those bigger heals. Druids also get access to pretty much every heal that the clerics do in the early access, so you don't really need to run a cleric if you are going to run this style of Druid. So if you don't like Shadowheart, then this is perfect for you. So let's get into the build itself. I'm going to go through the character creation pretty rapidly, as I've covered this in some of my other Druid videos. So if you want a further explanation of what's happening here, go check out my Druid class video. But the race that we're going to pick here is the Wood Elf, for the +1 for Wisdom, as that's our primary stat, and the +2 to Dexterity, so we get a little bit of extra AC so we can avoid taking damage. As we're not going to be wild shaping here, Dexterity is important, as we will need a high Dexterity for initiative, as well as keeping our armor class up high. In terms of background, anything that gives proficiencies in the wisdom skills is what you should be looking for here. So animal handling, insight, medicine, perception, and survival. Folk hero is the best pick, and you should be able to get most of the wisdom skills based on your choices here. In terms of attributes, we really want to focus on wisdom, so getting that to 16, dexterity to 16, and constitution to 14. This will even out. Constitution is our third stat, so that when we do have concentration active, we have a better chance of surviving through that constitution saving throw. For the rest of your points, just even them out across the board. It doesn't really matter too much. Strength, intelligence, and charisma aren't really important for this build, though if you are going to be using this Druid as your primary conversationalist, maybe at least make sure that your charisma is on at least 10. For your spells and cantrips, we'll start off with cantrips. Now, the one thing you need to pick up regardless is Thorn Whip. This is a fantastic cantrip that you can use constantly. It pulls enemies towards you, it does a decent amount of damage, and it doesn't consume a spell slot. So you can use this constantly until you get access to the level 2 variants of spells, as well as some of the more powerful spells you can get from there. In terms of your second choice, Produce Flame or Shillelagh are the options here. My preference is Produce Flame, as it does give you a light that you can use, and it's also a fireball that you can send to enemies to deal a bit of extra damage if you do choose to. Shillelagh is okay, however, for the most part, you're not going to be in melee range to be able to use it, although you could pick it up if you choose to. Spells are a bit more personal preference and can be experimented with at any time, and the ones that I would choose to pick up at least initially is Thunderwave. Thunderwave is a really powerful attack in the early stages of the early access, and it does do a knockback to get enemies away from you, which is perfect for your ranged spellcaster so that you can avoid having enemies close to you. And for some healing, I would pick up either Cure Wounds or Healing Word. You can have both. There is no reason why you can't, especially once you do have access to more spell slots. And Goodberry. Goodberry is a great set and forget heal that you can give yourself a 1d4 hit points every turn once you have initially cast the spell. It's just a good little valuable spell to keep your health high if you are taking damage in fights. As you level up, you will gain more spell slots, so do experiment with spells. Always check your spell book and try different ones, see what fits for you. However, once you get to level 3, you get access to some of those level 2 type of spells. This is when you will start using other things than Thorn Whip as your main damage dealer. Now, speaking of leveling up, we're going to start the leveling up process. At level 2, you will pick a circle. We're going to pick the Circle of the Land. Regardless of your circle, you do unlock Wild Shape, although for this build, it is really used out of combat and as a maximum last resort. You will also get the Natural Recovery ability, so once per day out of combat, you can replenish expended spell slots so you can cast more spells. However, you could just long rest whenever you like. There is no penalty here. In terms of your extra spells, it is really up to you. You could pick up something like Fog Cloud or Fiery Fire. Even Entangle is valuable here, just so you can control the battlefield a bit easier, but again, personal preference. You will also get a cantrip at this level. Just pick whatever you didn't pick out of Shillelagh and Produce Flame. At level 3, you get to pick a spell circle. Now, really, you can pick any of these. It is up to you. Have a look at the spells that you gain per circle and pick whichever one you want to use those spells, although you're not really locking yourself out of anything as you get most of these spells anyway if you do choose to pick them up in your spellbook. The main focus on level 3 is the level 2 spells that you get access to. The main level 2 spells that we're going to pick up here is Heat Metal. Cause a metal weapon you see to glow red hot. The creature holding the weapon takes 2d8 fire damage and receives disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks until the start of their next turn. You can recast this every turn as a bonus action. So if there is a specific target you want to lock down and they have a metal weapon, you can cast this on them, gives them disadvantage. They take a ton of damage and you give them disadvantage on their attacks, and you can recast it with a bonus action while casting something else. And the second, if the target doesn't have a metal weapon or if there isn't a specific thing you need to lock down, is Moonbeam. Moonbeam, you can call down a silvery beam of pale light. Any creature that is inside the beam will take a 2d10 radiant damage while they're inside the beam, and if they move into the beam during their turn. And you can move this beam around with an action at the start of every turn. 2d10 damage is a lot in the early access, and it's also AoE, so it will hit anything that's within its radius. This is a really powerful ability that I use pretty much constantly throughout combat, especially in dark areas, as it does provide light to your allies. It's super important to use this ability as much as possible. It does act a little different to the tabletop because it's when you cast it on targets, it does do damage rather than when they move into it. But this may change, this may not change, just a bit of awareness for you there. When you hit level 4, you will get access to the Deep Wrath Wild Shape ability. This is good to use if you are going to use Wild Shape, although we're not really using it, but just an awareness thing that if you do use it, this is the Wild Shape form you should choose for combat. In terms of your cantrip, you could just really pick whatever, and the main focus for level 4 is the ability improvement feat, and we are going to get our wisdom to 18 because we are casting spells constantly. We want to have a higher wisdom as possible, so that's the choice we're going for here. Now for your equipment, the first things first, you want to drop that Druid armor as soon as possible and pick up some medium armor so that you get the extra AC. And if you're really worried about taking hits and you are taking damage, you could also equip a shield to get your AC to 18 or above, although it's not the worst if you just are using a staff for this build, and I prefer to use a staff as it really completes that Druid look that we're going for. There are 2 key equipment items that you should be getting for this build, and you can get them pretty early in the early access. The Hell Rider's Gloves. When you heal another creature, it gains resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage by weapon attacks. You can get this in the Druid Grove from Zevlor. This is just important to give yourself a little bit of resistances against the main attack varieties that do come from weapon attacks. And last is the Whispering Promise Ring. When the wearer heals a creature, it also receives a D4 bonus to attack rolls and saving throws. Running both of these makes your healer really powerful. One, you heal them and they get resistances to most common weapon attack types, and they also get Bless for the next turn, giving them bonus to attack rolls and saving throws, so they basically deal more damage. The Whispering Promise you can get from Volo at the Druid Grove, so you can get both of these items pretty early in the game, although you can get it later on at the Goblin Camp. There are some other items in the early access that do benefit from when you heal creatures, they do get some kind of a buff. However, these 2 are the most reliable. 1, they get Bless, and 2, they get resistances, so I prefer these 2. Now let's talk about some tips for this build. As soon as you start combat, you should set up some kind of a concentration spell, whether that be Moonbeam or Heat Metal or Entangle for the early stage or Spike Growth, whatever it may be. You want to set up a concentration spell so that you can really start combat on the right foot. You should use Heat Metal if you need to lock down a specific enemy and they are obviously using a metal weapon so that you can cast it on them. This is the key focus if there is a specific like boss or something that you are trying to lock down. Long rest often to get your spell slots back, although as mentioned you do have Nat Recovery, it just only gives you a couple, it doesn't give you all of your spell slots. You can use Wild Shape in this build, though I don't recommend it, but mostly as a last resort. So say, you run out of spell slots, you really need to take a few hits because the fight's going bad, you can Wild Shape into a Deep Wrath or whatever else you've got and just tank some hits, deal a little bit of damage and see how you go. If you do just need to deal damage to some dudes in melee range, you can use Shillelagh, or you could pick up the Flame Blade spell and you can just really wreak havoc with that, but this isn't a melee focused druid, this is mostly range, so we want to stay away from targets as much as possible. If you have the equipment mentioned above, make sure that your Druid is the one healing your allies for the buffs so that they're not wasting those buffs. You know, you don't want to be wasting your other character's actions healing and then they're not even getting the buffs as well. So make sure your Druid is doing the primary healing. And if you are going to be using concentration spells, you can use your heal as a bonus action and then move around Moonbeam or something as an action. There's plenty of flexibility and ways that you can use both your bonus action and your action in the same turn with this build, and I had a ton of fun playing it. If you are looking for more Druid builds, check out my Wild Shape tank build, which goes through using Wild Shape, whereas this build is the complete opposite. Please follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and on Twitch, where I stream 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, Australian night times. Hope to see you guys there in the next stream. Thank you for watching this video. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.